Good day, good day. I do hope you are doing well. We are continuing with our Bible reading lessons. This is day 84 of our Bible reading. We've read from Judges 19, 20, and 21, which brings us to the close of the book of Judges. As can be seen, it does not end well. The book of Judges was one where the Israelites were in a cycle of disobedience, but this was not just a cycle, it was a downward spiral wherein they're becoming worse and worse. And we see something of that nature in the last three chapters, where in chapter 19 we see the Levite and his concubine, but she ends up being abused and murdered. And then in chapter 20 we see now Israel wants to go against the Benjamites because this abuse and murder were done at the hands of some Benjamite men. And here we see indeed that Israel will once again inquire from God about whether or not they should go and fight with their brother Benjamin. Indeed, at the end, we see Israel giving a great defeat to the Benjamites, such that in chapter 21, we can see that the numbers were so narrow, and they needed to also solve the problem about how are we going to have Benjamin continue as a tribe in terms of them finding wives. So chapter 21, they try and solve the problem of having wives. Now let us go straight into some of the verses I've highlighted, and I'll give a few lessons as usual. Starting with Judges chapter 19, where in this story we have read of this Levite and his concubine. He is spending the night at her father, and they're being delayed because of great hospitality, which is something wonderful to see in terms of the hospitality. But what then happens is that as they're delayed and they're making their journey, they are in trouble. And the first verse I've highlighted is verse 12, where it says, "And his master said to him, we will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah." So this is it's a very sad statement, because on one side it is positive that this man wants to be associated, wants to have his company with the people of Israel. He says that he does not want to turn aside to the foreigners. You could see that this Levite wanted to be associated with the people of Israel, and thus he decided to pass on to Gibeah. And what makes it sad is that he's going to come in trouble. Imagine when you said that no to foreigners, you want to go away from the city of foreigners, but you want to go to your own people, but your own people are the ones who are going to bring trouble upon you. This was the sad state of Israel. This was the situation of what had become of Israel after them having went into a cycle of sin. When people remain in a cycle of sin, darkness can come upon those people, so much so that perhaps this man was going to be better off in the city of foreigners. Can you imagine that he said that they do not belong to the people of Israel? We will go and we will pass on to Gibeah. We want to go to our own people. And yet their own people are the ones who are going to abuse them, are the ones who are going to bring trouble upon them. I almost use the words which are used in the book of John, which says that Jesus came to his own, but his own did not receive him. And no wonder that this gospel then, it became extended to even the Gentiles, as we see how his own did not receive him. This is quite an interesting passage, verse, which shows us that this man chose his own people, but his own people were the ones who were going to bring trouble to him. So as we have read this story, there was a crime that took place. This story, it rings a bell. It really looks exactly like what happened back in Sodom and Gomorrah. Back in Sodom, when the man went to Lot's house and they demanded to take Lot's visitors. The Israelites are repeating something which has happened before, but it had happened at a city which was destroyed, where God rained sulfur upon that city, a city that God brought judgment upon it, and his own people His own people, his own covenant people are committing the exact same atrocity. They're committing the exact same sin where they want to have intimacy with this man, to abuse a man. Imagine wanting to lay with a man. This is a sin that is taking place in Israel. And I believe that the writer, the author of this book is even being intentional by clearly using the same language. This story looks exactly like what we read back in Genesis. Everything. Where the host says, no, what about my daughter? We saw with Lot, he says, no, I've got daughters here. It's the same story. And what the writer is clearly showing us is that we should not forget about Sodom. And therefore he's linking how this event shows us that the evil, the sin upon Israel had gone into the state of Sodom. And God will bring judgment, because God is not one who says, because you are my people, I will not judge you. And because they were Sodom, I will judge them. And this was the sad state. When we read in verse 23, it says, and the man, the master of their house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house to do such a vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. I mean, this is exactly what the story of Sodom looked like back when the men went to the house of Lot. The crime of the men of Gibeah was at that extent. This is the darkness that had come upon the land. You see, the sin brought them this far. When they continued in the cycle of sin, it continued to bring them into this position, into this point of darkness. And indeed, they violate the concubine all night. She was violated, she was abused until she died. And as we've read, this Levite, he divides her limb by limb into 12 pieces. We read that in verse 29. And he sent all of these pieces throughout the territory of Israel for them to see what has happened. And I want to believe that what has happened is not just about the men of Gibeah who did it. I want to believe that what has happened was because of the cycle of sin. Because what Israel was doing when they were in the cycle of sin, the environment, it led up to this dark position wherein there's a dark cloud over Israel. And as we move over to chapter 20, where there's a war which is about to take place, what we can begin to see perhaps is that the state of Israel had really become so worse. There's something positive in verse 1 of chapter 20. It says, then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. Something positive here, that yes, there was an atrocity. Yes, there was an evil that had taken place. There was a darkness that had come upon the land. But if there's one positive, is that they came together as one man to the Lord. That statement, assembled as one man, a sense of unity. And then when we read in verse 3, it says, now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, that's in brackets. And it continues saying, and the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? And we know that the Levite is going to give his answer in terms of the story. He'll recount the story of what had happened. But I want to think that this evil happened because of all of them. Blood is in all their hands because of the sin, because they were given to idols. They rejected God. They left God. They committed all sorts of sin. And this is what happens when a people go into sin. So they had a part to blame as well. Yes, the men of Gibeah were responsible for what had taken place. But I want to think that the whole of Israel was responsible of the evil that is taking place in their land, for they had rejected the law of God. They ask, tell us, how did this evil happen? And yes, the Levite answers, but perhaps this evil happened because of what we read from the very beginning of the book of Judges. How these people decided not to fully obey God. They decided not to fully obey the instructions that they were given, even through leaders like Joshua, like Moses. In that disobedience, in them now not taking the land and driving out the Canaanites, in them coming into marriage with them, and they are giving their own daughters to them, taking their women as well and marrying them. And now they begin to worship the Baals, the idols, and everything. We read previously how they were worshiping every sort of God that there is in this land. This is what led to this evil. This evil was not just about Gibeah. This evil was about a collective, what was done by all of them. Indeed, as I just think about even now, even today, even as we reflect, do we see ourselves as also responsible for the things that go on in this world? Do we see that Jesus also died for us? Do we see ourselves as that it was because of also our sin that he went on the cross? That it's not just the Jews who crucified him, but it's as if we were also there. It's as if we were also responsible because of the sin that is also in us. Do we see ourselves as those who can say that the evil in this world, I've also contributed. I also need to repent. I also need to come back to God. I also need to be reconciled with God. Tell us, how did this evil happen? And verse 8, again, something positive. And all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. They were united. They rose as one man. They were given into this mission that we need to bring justice in terms of what has taken place. All right. And then verse 13 says, now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel. So that's how it all began. They wanted to only kill or put to death the men who had committed the sin. Give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah. But verse 13 continues and says, but the Benjamites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. So it's not that the people of Israel wanted to go to war with the whole of the Benjamites. So the Benjaminites decided not to give up their brothers, not to give up the men who had committed this sin. But again, the beautiful thing to observe in verse 13 is that the Israelites had an intention to purge the evil from Israel. And those words ring from the law of Moses, that you must purge the evil from among you. You must purge the evil from among you. Indeed, we see these things also in the New Testament, that one must purge, you must cut out the sin. cut out the sin. Cut out the sin. So purge the evil from Israel. So we see that they had a great and a good intention. And then verse 18, it's also a very beautiful verse. It reminds me of how the book of Judges began. So after we've read about all of these cycles of sin, finally the people of Israel, in verse 18 it says, they arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin, the Benjaminites? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. This is exactly what we wrote, that we read in the very first chapter of the book of Judges, where the people came before God and asked, who shall go up first? But then when we read it, it was about them going up first to take the land, to go and fight with the inhabitants of the land, with the Canaanites and all the people, the Jebusites and the people of the land. But in this case, it's them fighting with the Benjaminites, fighting with their own people, their own brother. And God doesn't say, no, don't fight them. God actually he gives the same response that he gave in the very first chapter. He says, Judah shall go up first. I think there's a trend here that one should notice and that one cannot avoid from noticing. Judah was said will go up first back in chapter 1, and now even here it says Judah shall go up first. And I think that this trend has to do with the kingship going to go to David, considering the time that this might have been written. One of the theories, or one of the what people think about the book of Judges, even though we do not know the author, some suspect it might be Samuel, who is attempting to give a good evidence that Judah is where the king should come from. And here we see Judah shall go up first. But one beautiful thing to observe here is that after it's all said and done, after all the battles had taken place, the people inquired of God. They inquired of God. Yes, they were given to their sin. They were given to all the bad things that they were doing, worshipping the Baals, all of these things that they were not supposed to be doing. The entire cycle of sin, darkness upon the land of Israel. However, even in all of that, they inquired of God. Are we going to say that, God, we're already in sin, we're already in darkness, we might as well continue? Or are we actually going to go back to God and say, God, lead us, guide us, speak to us? Are we going to inquire of God even in the presence of the darkness? So that's something positive to see, because they had nowhere else to run to. They ran to God. They inquired of God. Let us not take dark situations and brokenness and being fallen or being sinners. Let's not take all of those things to be reasons not to go back to God, not to inquire of God, not to seek God. We can be those who inquire of God. Verse 22 says, and this is after, the people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 of the men of Israel. I wonder why God allowed this to happen. It's quite interesting that verse 18, God does not say that, and behold, I've given them to your hands. He simply says, Judah shall go up first. They inquired of God, who shall go up first? And God says, Judah. We don't hear them asking God, will you give them to our hands? Neither does God give that promise. But 22,000 men fell of Israel. And I think that this might also have to do with the fact that they were not so innocent after all. That judgment had to come upon the Israelites, because they were indeed walking in in sin. They were worshipping the idols and doing all sorts of evil in the land, as we have been reading. So perhaps that's one reason they were defeated as well. So day 1, we see 22,000 of the men of Israel fall. And verse 22 says, but the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. I love that. That even though they were defeated, they took courage. Are we a people who can take courage? Even though you might have lost the first time, do you get up again and take courage and form the battle line again and say, you know what, let us try again. Let us not give up just because we failed. Let us get up, dust ourselves, and take courage. It says that they took courage and formed the battle line in the same place. But not only that, verse 23 says, and the people of Israel went up and wept. They wept before the Lord until evening. And they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near and fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, go up against them. So we see that even in the second day, the men of Benjamin destroyed them. 18,000 of the people of Israel were defeated. This is a judgment. It's not just any war. This is a judgment as well. But what's encouraging to see is that they were determined. They were determined to purge the evil, even at the cost of them losing their lives. 22,000 men fell on day 1, and yet they formed the battle line because they are determined to purge the evil. Are we interested to remove all the sin in our lives? Are we interested to remove all the things that lead us to temptation in our lives? Are we interested to cut out that which we must not be in our lives, even at the cost, even when it might be difficult to do so, even though you might fail on day 1 to do so? Are you determined enough to cut out the thing that must not be in your life? And when you are determined, you might lose the first day, but you get up again and you pray, you seek God, you ask God for guidance. It is possible for us to be conquerors. We just need to get up and continue the good fight of faith. When we need to deal with cutting out or purging out evil in our lives, we don't need to give up. You don't need to give up when it comes to cutting out sin in our lives. Don't say, no, but this sin of mine, it's my sin. There's nothing else. I need to keep this one. No. Let's go to God. Let's inquire of God. Let's receive help from God. So indeed, they wept before God. They wept before God. And we see how 18,000 fell. Then verse 26 says, then all the people of Israel, the whole assembly, went up and came to Bethel and wept. And they sat before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings. Okay, so they added something more. Because previously it says that they did what? They wept. Right? Verse 23 says, they wept before the Lord until evening. And verse 26 says, then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. So the weeping continues. But this time they sat before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. Right? Not only that, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. It's as if they remembered that, by the way, we were given, offerings, we were given all of these things for us to be doing. They offered burnt and peace offerings before God. And it says in verse 27, and the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? They even speak with, a bit of humility here. Or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. So here we see that finally God speaks clearly, not just saying you can go, but I've given them into your hand. Here we can learn something about just the specific words from God. God can speak in a very specific way. And in the specific way here, he mentions it. He says, I will give them into your hand. But before, he had not said so. He only said they can go. This was the great battle. And as we have read, now the men of Benjamin fall. Verse 35 says, and the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these men who drew the sword. Notice what verse 35 says. It says, the Lord defeated. Very interesting choice of words. The Lord defeated. Judgment and justice belongs to God. All right, and the last verse 48 in chapter 20 says, and the men of Israel turned back against the people of Judah and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men and beasts, and all they found, and all the towns that they found, they set on fire. So they did to the people of Benjamin what they were supposed to be doing to the other nations. Striking everyone by the sword, going into the city. And this can give us a clue that not only was this fall upon the soldiers, but also upon even the women. This can give us a clue into that, because they're going into their towns and into the city by striking men and beasts and all they found. And they even set it on fire. This was a devotion to God. This was, those words which we read about, you must devote this city to God. This is not something which can be redeemed, for these people had committed this evil. And then when we go to chapter 21, verse 2 says, and the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. Now I like verse 2, because even though they had defeated Benjamin, they still wept. They still came before the Lord. They did not just go before the Lord when they were losing the battle. They came before the Lord even after they had won. And they wept bitterly, because this was indeed a sad day in Israel. A tribe was almost lost. And verse 3 says, and they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? And I've given an answer to this, that this was because of sin. The wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. Verse 4 says, and the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. What an interesting connection, because last time they offered the same when they were attempting to find out whether they can fight, because they were losing in the battle. But even after they've won the battle, they still went back to God and offered burnt and peace offerings. They realized that we have sinned. They needed to offer these burnt offerings. They needed to make atonement. This was a sad day in Israel. Almost a whole tribe was wiped out. And as we know, they needed to solve the problem that the men of Benjamin should have wives. And verse 16 says, then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And this connects to what I was saying, that they did go into the city and devoted they killed, they set it on fire. And now what are they to do? Because Benjamin must continue to have wives and children. And it says in verse 25, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his sight, in his own eyes. So this shows that even how the men of Benjamin were to get a wife which involved kidnapping, God never approved of it. So some people want to say, why does the Bible allow kidnapping and so on? No, in those days there was no king. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And this was the state of Israel. This was the situation of Israel. They had gone from west to west, and almost a whole tribe was wiped out. So much so that part of the vows that they made, they could not even be able to give wives to the men of Benjamin. And they had to steal, they had to go, and this was affecting 200 men, because the other 400 were catered for, but the other 200 remaining needed to steal, to kidnap a wife. This was the state of Israel. So the very last verse, which concludes the book of Judges, is that there was no king in Israel. This is forward looking. In fact, one could even say this is perhaps a retrospective writing, in that by the time it is being written, perhaps there was already a king. And perhaps that king was Saul, who is from Benjamin. And this story shows that Benjamin was one tribe which had committed sin, and they were almost wiped out. So as we close, the one thing that we can clearly see in this passage is that sin leads to death. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God, God gives us this grace that we can be saved. The gift of God is salvation. We can be saved. Right? We don't need to die in sin. We do not need to end and walk in sin and experience death. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish. What we saw here was perishing, not just for Benjamin, but also for Israel. But whoever believes in God, whoever believes in the one whom he has sent, will not perish, but have life everlasting. Let us place our faith in Jesus. Let us not allow sin to grow in our lives. Let us purge evil in our lives, because when you allow sin to grow, then things become out of control. This is the answer to the question where they ask, why has this happened in Israel? It's because of the sin which was growing and growing. It leads to a disaster. Sin leads to disaster. Families are being destroyed. Societies are being destroyed. People's lives are being destroyed. Sin leads to a disaster. The only hope for us is to come to God. Is to, in the midst of the darkness, is to inquire of God, is to come to him. He says that, come, all of you who carry heavy burdens, come, and I will give you rest. Let us come to God. Amen and amen.